What's up, guys? It's Brandon Flash. Today we're going to be hopping into my 2021 Volkswagen ID.4, and I'm going to be answering some of your questions about what it's like to road trip in it. Now you're joining me inside the ID.4 with Baby Yoda and the Ev-Goat behind us. First, I want to start off with going over some stats from our road trip. I kind of put that at the end of our final road trip installment video, but in case you missed it, we drove 4,430 miles. We did that over the course of 16 days. We went from Charlotte to Denver to Minneapolis, and then back to Charlotte through Chicago. I mean, quite a few stops in between, but that's the general route, kind of a big circle of sorts. We averaged 2.6 miles per kilowatt hour, or for all your Tesla people, that's 384 watt hour per mile. And just as a point of reference, that's very close to what I would average in my old 2015 Model S 70D. So I think that's pretty respectable, and I was definitely driving fast. And towards the end of our road trip, the temperatures actually dropped quite a bit, so that was definitely not helping our efficiency with the heater and stuff on. I do have some notes down here, so if I'm looking down, that's why. One of the most common questions I get about road tripping in any EV, and especially in the ID.4, is how I plan the route. Well, I don't. When we do EV road trips, I usually take a look on PlugShare, Electrify America app. I sometimes use tools like ChargeWay and a better route planner just to have a general idea of the route, and just to know if it's feasible or not, and just kind of general length of each leg, and where the long stops might be if we're going a bit off the general intended corridor for that charging network. So I do a little bit of pre-planning, but for the most part we just hop in and go, and then just hop from Electrify America to Electrify America, or previously in our Tesla from supercharger to supercharger. It's kind of a miracle if we have a hotel room booked by 4 p.m. or 3 p.m. the day of that we're staying there. So that kind of tells you the lack of our planning. We like to have the flexibility to do whatever we want to do, and if we see something cool along the way, or if we end up at a hotel, or if we're tired or whatever, we have the flexibility to do that by not having things booked, rather than being forced to continue on or stop earlier than we wanted to if we have the energy to keep going. I can make a whole video about this if it's something that you guys would be interested in. Comment down below. But when I book hotels, I almost always try and book a hotel with charging. And the way I do that is essentially by cross-referencing Priceline, which is what we generally use for booking hotels, as well as PlugShare with the hotel lodging filter turned on. That's not 100% foolproof, but it usually will show pretty much every hotel with charging, so that's generally what I end up doing. One of the biggest benefits of charging overnight is that way you start each morning with a full charge, and I think that's kind of one of the biggest benefits of driving an electric car on a road trip. If you're driving a gas car on a road trip, you're not going to roll into a hotel with an empty tank of gas and then wake up with a full tank of gas. That's just not how that works, but with an EV, that's how it works. So I put it out on Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, asking you guys for your questions about what it's like to road trip in an ID.4 essentially. And one of the most common things I got was asking me to compare with my Tesla. For those that don't know or are new to the channel, I used to drive a 2015 Model S 70D. I bought that with about 106,000 miles on it. I sold it with 198,000 miles on it. And in the year of 2020, I put 60,000 miles on it. I drove to every state in the lower 48. I have a bunch of videos about that, so definitely check those out if you're interested. But we're here to talk about the ID.4 today. So what do I like about road tripping the ID.4 versus my Tesla? I would say the biggest thing is probably comfort. My old Model S had coil suspension, which of course the ID.4 does as well, but I think the ID.4 is calibrated a bit more with the suspension tuning for comfort rather than kind of a little bit of sportiness or roughness. The ID.4 also has massaging seats. Speaking of which, I'm going to turn those on right now. They feel great. The ID.4 also has faster charging than my previous Tesla. Being a 2015, it did not charge very quickly. Our average charging stop was probably close to an hour, maybe around 45-50 minutes. Whereas with the ID.4, I'll put some data up here. So I've got the data up here for you guys, but just to kind of talk about it a little bit, our longest charging stop was 56 minutes. That was in Waukee, Iowa, where we charged to 100%. And the reason we did that was we were heading from the Des Moines area, which is where that Electrify America is, all the way up to Minneapolis, which was 258 miles. If you watched part 2 of our road trip series, link up above for you guys, you'll see that there wasn't really any charging between Iowa and Minneapolis, at least on the Electrify America network, so we wanted to charge up all the way before we went off of that route. We did have quite a few stops in the 40-minute range, but that was mostly by choice. We could have charged less and then just driven a little slower. Our fastest stop was in Williamsburg, Kentucky. That was 17 minutes from 38 to 64%. But the calculated average charging time was 37 minutes, which Volkswagen quotes 5 to 80% in 38 minutes. So while we didn't always go from 5 to 80%, our average charge time was right around there. I definitely could have optimized that, but when you're on a road trip, maximizing speed is not always your number one priority. Along with the faster charging, the ID.4 also has 3 years of free charging on the Electrify America. And that's not just 30-minute sessions like on the Polestar 2 or even like the Audi e-tron GT or the Porsche Taycan. It's actually 3 years of unlimited, no time restriction sessions on Electrify America, which is pretty crazy and pretty awesome. I don't know how much Volkswagen had to pay for that, even though Volkswagen owns Electrify America, so it's kind of a moot point. But still, that couldn't have been a cheap endeavor for them. DC fast charging adds up quickly, so I anticipate we'll probably save at least a few $1,000s over the course of 3 years if we have this car the full time. Our previous Teslas did have free supercharging, so that's a little bit of a moot point for us in particular. However, for most people, they're not coming from a car with free charging, so that's definitely a benefit of the ID.4. And our old 2015 Model S 70Ds, Kaylee had one as well. While they were originally rated for 240 miles of EPA range, by the time we had them, especially towards the end, they were getting about 210 miles displayed rated range on the dash. So Teslas use a rated range display rather than a guessometer like the ID.4, in case you aren't familiar. And while it displayed 210 miles or so of rated range, it was pretty impressive if we could get more than maybe 150 miles, but typically we were aiming for 120 to 140 miles between charging stops. So to have the ID.4, which can actually get 200 plus miles of real world range, is quite the improvement for us. So we definitely enjoyed that. Our bladders didn't last as long as the range, so there were quite a few legs along the road that we actually stopped for bathroom breaks or food breaks before we needed to charge, which is kind of a weird concept for us coming out of those Model S's, where we were stopping basically every 90 minutes or less. And now let's move on to the things that I miss from my Tesla. There aren't a whole lot of things. None of them are like huge deal breakers, but there are some things. Autopilot, at least AP1, which is what I had in my 2015 Model S, which is not the same autopilot that's used on current Teslas. It was a bit more predictable than Travel Assist in the ID.4. That's not to say that Travel Assist is bad by any means. It's actually quite good. And once you adjust to how Travel Assist works, which is a bit different than Autopilot. So Travel Assist, it's more of an assistant than it is to try and drive for you like Autopilot is, even though both are absolutely assistants. You definitely need to pay attention. But Travel Assist, it's helping you along, but you're still kind of more actively driving. Whereas Autopilot, if you're on Autopilot, you're letting the car drive. If you're not on Autopilot, you're driving. There's not really an in-between. Whereas Travel Assist, even when you have it activated, will still let you fully drive and still stay on. Whereas on Autopilot, if you take over the steering or anything, it turns off Autopilot. So it's just kind of a difference in approach there. And I think I generally like Travel Assist more now that I'm used to it. But I think for most people, Autopilot is a bit more predictable and it's easier to tell what it's going to do. So take that for what you will. In the Tesla, we had MCU2, or the infotainment upgrades. We had Hulu and Netflix. that was pretty nice for longer charging stops, but obviously it's not as big of a deal with the shorter charging stops in the ID.4. So it is what it is, but it was kind of nice to have the entertainment while you were charging. Adding on to that a little bit on the technology department, the Tesla app is much better, especially for like monitoring your charge session remotely. With the ID.4, we had to use a combination of the Electrify America app and the Volkswagen CarNet. Yeah, CarNet app. Sorry, I had to double check there. And both of them are kind of terrible as far as monitoring your charge status. They'll both tell you if you're charging. They'll kind of tell you your state of charge, even though it's kind of delayed. But neither one will give you an accurate charging speed. CarNet doesn't show you charge speed at all. It will only tell you a time remaining, which is pretty useless. The Electrify America app will often just show 175 kilowatt, even though the ID.4 can't pull 175 kilowatt. It can do 125, though sometimes you will see around 130 with thermal losses and with AC or heat going. But anyway, the Tesla app will show you charging speed in kilowatt. It'll show you miles per hour. It will show you your charge limit, how long till you can continue on your trip. The app on a Tesla is just in a different league compared to Volkswagen's CarNet or the Electrify America app as far as seeing what your car is doing from afar. Not to mention being able to turn on climate, summon. There's just so many other features that the Tesla app has that the Volkswagen app doesn't even try to do because they're just not even there at all. One little annoying thing, when I would get out to plug in the car and then get back in, instead of the car staying on like a Tesla would if someone else is in the car shuts off and then turns back on, which with wireless CarPlay and Bluetooth audio and stuff is pretty annoying. I wish it would just stay on with like lock or unlock or passengers in the car. Kind of like a Tesla where the car just turns on when you open the door and then doesn't fully turn on until you put your foot on the brake. I wish there were kind of two different levels of on in the ID.4 versus it's fully on when you get in, put your foot on the brake, buckle your seat, and I wish it would just have like infotainment on the rest of the time. Adding on again about monitoring our remote charging status, the ID.4 doesn't tell you how many kilowatt you're drawing as far as charge speed. So it goes from miles per hour charging speed to miles per minute when you're DC fast charging. So if your guessometer is around 250 to 300 miles, full speed DC fast charging is 7 miles per minute. But if you're ripping it across the country and your guessometer is showing like 160, 170 miles at 100%, suddenly full speed DC fast charging will only show around 4 or 5 miles per minute. So your charging speed monitor is actually a variable measure, and that's just terrible. There's no reason that Volkswagen can't show you kilowatt while you're charging, or volts and amps. I mean, that would be ideal, but not really necessary. Just show me kilowatt. I want to know how many kilowatt I'm drawing from the DC fast charger so I don't have to park, so I can keep an eye on the DC fast charger screen. And on Electrify America, it's cycling between like a hold screen and actually showing your charge speed. And not to mention there's probably glare, so just let me see my stinking charge speed on screen, Volkswagen. For a lot of people, Tesla superchargers are the reason they buy a Tesla, or at least the reason they give themselves for buying a Tesla, even if they don't really road trip. And while superchargers are really good, they're really reliable, they're not the only game in town anymore. Electrify America, at least in my experience on this road trip, was pretty much rock solid. We did have to change stalls once for low speeds, and then a second time we plugged into a station that actually was displayed as unavailable on the screen, but I tried to activate it ahead of time on the CarPlay app, and the CarPlay app didn't reflect that status, so I pulled up, parked at that station, went to plug in, but luckily the way that station was set up, I was able to just grab the handle from the next station over and plug in without issues. So I didn't experience any of the poor reliability that some people talk about on Electrify America. I know on higher draw cars like the Taycan, the e-tron GT that will do 200 plus kilowatt, there are some reliability concerns from what I hear. I don't have firsthand experience of that, at least at this point. But what I can speak to is the ID.4 and my road tripping. I did not have anxiety even one time that I wouldn't be able to charge. Like, sure, there might be 1 or 2 stations at an install of Electrify America that could be down, but that's not going to stop you from charging your car. Worst case, you have to move stalls, or maybe you have a little bit slower speeds, but that's not the end of the world. At least on this route, a lot of the superchargers and Electrify America stations are actually at pretty similar locations. A lot of them are in the same towns, so they might be like on opposite sides of the interstate or like across the street from each other. But I'd like to actually see some more partnership between Tesla and Electrify America to do installs together. I think it would be good for both of them. They can kind of share some of the burden of the infrastructure cost. And it never hurts to have more stations, especially if Tesla's opening up those superchargers to other vehicles. That way you can kind of really get an A/B test of, if both are there, which one are people using? I think if they're right next to each other, a lot of the time people are going to choose the supercharger if they can use it, as long as the cost is reasonable. So far what we're seeing in the Netherlands is the cost is very competitive, and I hope that transfers to the US, at least with an adapter, of course, since we don't have that plug here. Overall, as far as charging goes, I think it's kind of a non-issue. As long as you're not going to the Dakotas, Wyoming, eastern Montana, or West Virginia, you pretty much shouldn't have any issues, even with an ID.4 and relying on public CCS infrastructure, whether Electrify America or otherwise. But if you do need to go to one of those states, at least as of right now in November 2021, you kind of do need a Tesla, unless you own another car and you're willing to take that to go to those places. And some closing thoughts. Overall, I think road tripping in the Volkswagen ID.4 is exceptionally easy, very comfortable, especially in Pro S or First Edition with the massaging seats. I think it's a really nice place to spend many hours. The car is pretty efficient, even at speed. Charging's really a non-issue. But I think Volkswagen kind of needs to get their act together. They need to release 2.3 or 3.0 or whatever version they're saying will have route planning, because if Volkswagen really wants to take on the CR-V, the RAV4, the MX-5 or CX-5 market, they really need route planning. Those average consumers that are buying the Volkswagen ID.4 as their first EV, they're not the ones that are going to be using things like a better route planner, plug share, downloading random apps onto their phone to use with CarPlay. They're the ones that just want to be able to hop in, put in a destination, have the car figure out the entire plan for them, and go. And right now, Tesla does that better than anyone else. And Volkswagen owns Electrify America. There's no reason that Volkswagen can't have plug-in charge and built-in route planning and have it work great. So Volkswagen, if you're paying attention, hopefully you are, get it together, people. Like, there's no excuse at this point. The ID.4 has been out since February or March of this year. We're now at November. What happened to the every 12 weeks for Volkswagen ID.4 over-the-air updates? We haven't seen a single one yet. I think the first edition saw some very minor bug fixes, but that's it. We need full over-the-air software improvements with actual added features and to make the car better. It's not to say the car is bad, but if they really want to have this car be the EV for millions rather than millionaires, to quote Volkswagen, they need to make it easy enough for those millions to use the car. Would I road trip it again? Absolutely. Should you have to use tools like ChargeWay and a better route planner? No. But anyway, those are my thoughts on road tripping in the Volkswagen ID.4. If you have questions, comments, your own experiences you want to share, comment down below. Would love to hear them. Happy to answer any questions you may have. If you enjoyed this, hopefully you did, hit the like button. If you want to see more ID.4 and other EV content, hit the subscribe button. We'll see you guys next time.